Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Climate Change and Sustainability Committee this morning. Can I please start by introducing the top table? On my far left, your right-hand side, of Councillor Liz Barrett, Vice Convener. Next to Liz is Fraser Crofts, the Strategic Lead for Environment and Infrastructure. And on my right side, keeping me right as always, is Adam Taylor from Democratic Services. I will now ask Adam to confirm any apologies received and advise members in attendance and online.
Thanks, Convener. Morning, members. We've had no formal apologies this morning. All members are present in the chambers apart from Councillor Kilgallie, so I'll just ask him to confirm if he can actually hear us.
Yes, I can. I'm with you.
That's fine. Thank you. Yeah, all members are present, Convener.
Thank you, Adam. Can I ask if there are any declaration of interest in respect of any business in the agenda today? Thank you. Can we agree the minute from our last meeting held on the 21st of August of this year? Thank you. On with the first item on the business today, annual update on the delivery plan for the 24-29 Perth and Kinross local heat and energy efficiency strategy and the local area heat energy plan for 24-25. Can I ask Serge Marone, Economic Development Manager for Business and Investment, to introduce the report? Serge.
Good morning, conveners. I will ask maybe Stuart McLaren to introduce the report because he was obviously the one of the authors of the report.
Just Stuart, member, and give an introduction who you are, that you're the new officer that's leading on this, so that people understand, because I don't think many people will have met you yet.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, everyone. My name is Stuart McLaren. I'm the new Climate Change and Energy Officer within the Climate Change team. I've been brought in to help deliver the LHEAS and LEAP strategies. The report that you've seen seeks to note the progress in implementing the delivery plan for the local heat and energy efficiency strategy and the local area energy plan approved at the Climate Change and Sustainability Committee on the 27th of November 2023, and to approve the priorities for the next 12 to 18 months. Both the LHEAS and LEAP are firmly aligned to the priorities and vision of the corporate plan for a Perth and Kinross where everyone can live life well, free from poverty and inequality. They reflect the views of our communities, elected members, stakeholders and party organisations. Actions are being implemented through the Council's LHEAS and LEAP coordination team and LHEAS and LEAP steering group, and by overall operational teams. Both continue to build on the strong partnerships already in place, recognising that achieving LHEAS LEAP priorities will require a collective effort from delivery partners, stakeholders, communities and residents of Perth and Kinross. The annual report provides a summary of the progress made since approval and outlines the key strategic priorities for the next 12 to 18 months. And I'm happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you very much.
If there's any questions, if you can just indicate in the chat box, or if you're in the room, just grab my attention. Thank you. Angus.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, thanks for that report. I'm interested in section 6.12, and it was a campaign to encourage and educate businesses, homeowners, private landlords and tenants to install heat pumps. I wonder if you could give us any more information on that. For example, was there any success? Did any major landlords or businesses go ahead with heat pump installation? And specifically, information, please, on the funding of that. So, for example, were heat pumps fully funded by either ourselves or some other level of government?
Sergio,
Yes, I can answer that question. Thank you for your question, Councillor Forbes. We are really at early stage in terms of this awareness and education of landlords and other external stakeholders. So this come first with signposting, obviously businesses to advice and support, which is already there. There's quite a lot of information, there in terms of how they can install heat pumps, where they can find advice, and also in terms of what potential funding is out there. I cannot really give you exact outcomes from that actions, but we are at a kind of early stage of that that action. The other thing that we have done is through projects funded by Innovate UK. We've worked to effectively develop with the communities some model to effectively help the communities, but also businesses in the community to work together, particularly the people who are contracting, the people who are doing the work, to see how they can effectively come together to identify the needs and who can effectively meet these needs in the community. And develop a network of trusted traders, for instance, to install heat pumps and to work with the residents and businesses to help them to do that. But we're still at an early stage. And in terms of the strategy itself, we are talking about a few years before it will effectively make a significant impact.
Yeah, please do that.
In terms of my question on funding, then, I mean, for example, just pick landlords as one example from the report. Would a landlord be given complete funding to put in a heat pump, or would they have to fund some of it themselves?
I don't have the answer to that question, but I can easily come back to you with what is available for people to install heat pumps.
Thank you. I'd appreciate that. And if you can share that with the whole committee, that would be appreciated, because it would be good information to have. I've got Noah next, and then Hugh, you ask. Yeah.
Thanks. I hope you can all hear me. I've got a question about 6.14 and the mention of limiting bus travel increases to 10%. I was wondering, firstly, what the benchmark for that is, and then secondly, where we are at now in terms of that limited increase.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Kogali. I'm not the best placed person to answer that question, but it's, I think, directly linked to the mobility strategy and how we want to reduce mileage into the area. I think that benchmark was when the local area energy planning was developed. We've looked at what will be the path to net zero by 2045, and the reduction of transport. It was one element of as part of that path. And the calculations were made that effectively to achieve that net zero by 2045, we will need to effectively reduce transport by that level. But I think, I don't know if we have more information maybe from, I don't want to anticipate mobility strategy, but I think that could be potentially covered by the mobility strategy item as well.
Is that okay, Noah? Do you want to leave that as well until the mobility strategy?
Yeah, I can ask again in the mobility strategy. It would just be helpful, to know where we are in terms of that, because 10% isn't a huge amount. So I'll ask him when we get to the mobility strategy, but it would be helpful to know that.
Thank you. Thank you. Hugh, your next question for you.
Yeah, thank you. No, I just wondering what experience our team at Top Table have of the SCARTH reports and ECO4 schemes that are on the go just now, which seem to be fairly fine for a modern style bungalow. But when you get more rural houses in the countryside, the cost of the installation kind of quite often puts the cost of the scheme right out the window. I know one property, which I'm not closely involved with, where it's grade 7, which is the most poor insulation you can get. But because of the costs, it's a dormer windows in the house, the cost of insulation put the costs of putting a scheme in out the window because of the cost. I think it's how SCARTH work out the reports, or it's based on the cost of fuel. If fuel oil, which is getting cheaper just now, that means even less money available to improve the property, to put in the heat pumps, etc., solar panels and things. What experience have you? But I say the rural property seem to be more prejudiced against rather than in a township, more modern bungalow type houses.
Right. I think the question is your question is about the challenges for more rural properties and how are we dealing with that within the thing. Sergio, you're going to take that one. Thank you.
I can take that one as well. Thank you, Councillor Anderson, for your question. I think it's very important, and that's what we are doing, particularly for the council housing stock, is to understand the type of buildings we are dealing with in terms of the build, the materials, what's possible in that. So we're going through that process at the moment in terms of categorizing the buildings so we can effectively identify the appropriate solutions for these buildings. But there are buildings which have particular challenges like the one you describe in some of the rural areas when you effectively you take into account the cost of insulation or improving energy efficiency and the cost to install any new technology in these buildings. So they will be problematic to do that. There are some quick wins. So the fact that you don't necessarily have to wait for improving the energy efficiency of a building to introduce a new technology because of the nature of the cost and the energy efficiency, but that can obviously bring some additional comfort or some savings to the owner or the occupiers of this building. I think maybe Devindi wants to add.
Devindi, do you want to come in?
Thank you. And it was also just to add that there's potentially different funding schemes. So there's ECO4, which has a particular focus on fuel poverty. So the affordability and the sort of impact it will make on fuel poverty is the sort of key criteria for deciding that fund. The other fund that the council gets money for that our housing team manages is called HEAPS ABS, which is area-based schemes. And that's more targeted on the harder to heat rural properties, the properties that are hard to get inner wall cavity insulation, or sort of they require external cladding or things like that. And that's something that at the last LHE's working group, we'd been discussing how do we sort of target that, or how do we sort of distribute that more widely, because right now it's been linked to properties near where our housing team has been doing work. So that is something we'll be looking at going forward.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you. You okay with that, Hugh? Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you. Councillor Andrew Parrott.
Thank you very much, Convener. I'm at paragraph 620 on page 15 of our report. I'm interested in the figure Perth and Kinross will need an additional 300 megawatts of local scale renewables. In principle, I think I'm all in favour of that. The more we can generate locally, the less we are reliant on the national grid, which is under increasing demand. But in a sense, what my question is, to what extent do we need this additional 300 megawatts? Is it because the national grid can't cope? Is it because there's a target set for us? And Also, if you like, what percentage of our total need does that 300 megawatts represent? Thanks.
Andrew. Serge or is Grant?
Thank you very much for your question, Councillor Parrott. In the same way as for the reduction of transport, the work for the local area energy planning identify obviously the generation of local renewable energy as a key element to decarbonize, be on the path to decarbonize the area, the energy system by 2045. So that figure has been calculated using that kind of path to say, well, if we want to be have a decarbonized energy system by 2045, we need to generate that level of additional local scale renewables. But that's obviously generation on site and use on site, so it doesn't go into the grid. So we are talking about quite a small local generation measures there, like solar panels, for instance, and it's solar, for instance, in the model is taking quite an important place in how to decarbonize the whole energy system there. Regarding your following question about the percentage, I'm not sure if I have an answer there, but I can come back to you on that.
Okay, Andrew. Grant Lane.
Thanks, convener. Kind of surprised that, like Councillor Forbes, that in question 6.2, paragraph 6.2, it says we launched a campaign to encourage businesses, etc., etc., etc. Well, I think somebody would be able to answer what the level of funding is if we've launched a campaign. So I thought somebody in the officers would know exactly how much funding is available. So we'll get that. I think Serge is going to get back to us, but if we have launched a campaign to encourage people to come to us to get funding to install heat pumps, etc. I would have thought we would have known how much funding's available or where the funding's available from. But put that aside just now. In point 6.19, we're talking about EV infrastructure, but I think a lot of the limit of that is because we can't, the infrastructure isn't there by the delivery of energy, SSEN, etc. So I'm just wondering how we are working together with energy providers to actually provide us with the energy that we need and their infrastructure to move that forward the next 12 to 18 months. Thanks.
Thank you. Serge, are you able to come in on that one again? There is work goes on, I know that.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Grant, for your question on what we've done over the past years. We've developed quite a strong relationship with Scottish and Southern Energy Network. We're obviously developing the grid and providing the infrastructure to support the EV infrastructure. And what we've tried to do is obviously to focus on the evidence that we have on what's available and what could be available in the future from the grid. And that's why we've worked with them on developing live data, so we understand what investment SSEN is planning to do in the area, and we are mapping that out, and we are making that available to protect, prospective developers, including the council, but prospective developers. That platform is called Lensa, and that platform is maintained by SSEN, but it is fed by different operators and actors, including the council. So that's the first step, is effectively to share the information so the data is available and we can develop the project. The next step, I think, will be and that's covered as well as one of the action is the EV infrastructure project that the council is taking forward. So it will be part of that element. But what has happened in the private sector is particularly in the fast charging, ultra fast charging area, they have already used this data to effectively locate charging facilities within Perth and Kinross. And you can see there's a few more coming in, particularly next to a petrol station, because they obviously see the market advantages for them, but they're using the data available on these platforms to do that. So I think it will be a collective effort from the private and public sector to do that. SSEN is obviously aware of these market trends, so they try to adapt to these, and it's part of the investment plan in terms of how they reinforce substations or grid infrastructure to take care of that. But there are obviously competing priorities for them as well, because they also have to provide support to other infrastructure, that EV infrastructure.
Thank you.
Thanks for the answer, Serge. That makes sense. It's just that, in the report it's saying we'll move on with EV infrastructure, but there's no point in us moving on with EV infrastructure if it's not joined up with the supply, because we can have all the EV infrastructure for charging vehicles, but if there's no supply coming to the chargers, it doesn't go any further. So just wanted to check that we're actually working together to build infrastructure. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Angus, your second question.
Thanks, convener. Serge, I'm on paragraph 6.14. It's near the top of the page, and it references the 15% reduction. This is what we hope, and 15% reduction in heavy goods vehicle mileage and in van demands to 10%. So a couple of quick questions on that. Given our geographical location, pretty much right in the middle of Scotland, I imagine we have a huge number of HGV travel through our area, and given that there's hardly a day goes by without an Amazon van turning up at my door and most of my neighbours' doors, I'm wondering if these are genuinely achievable, and I have to confess I have some doubts about that. Thanks.
Do you want to? I'm not sure. The goals and the strategies kind of set. There's no question. I think there's challenges in achieving them all, and that's certainly something that will come out in the mobility strategy as well. We've got this strategy with what we want to achieve and where we're going. We've got a list of actions in that will help us on the path to get there. The reducing the transport side needs a societal behavioural kind of change. So I'm not sure. And I think they are. I would agree. If it's that it's challenging to achieve, I would have to agree with you. There will be challenges, but we have to have a look and see how we can try and influence it and try and achieve this strategy and these goals.
Do you mind if I just come back on that? And I'm genuinely not trying to be argumentative here, but given where we are, and an HGV going from Glasgow to anywhere north is going to come into Perth and Kinross area, I don't actually think we can stop that. And I don't think we can stop me and my neighbours buying stuff from Amazon. So my fear about this is that we've set a goal which is ambitious and a great idea, but actually probably in the real world unachievable. And that's my fear, is we've got lots of ambitions, but we don't actually have control over how we get to them, because we can't stop an HGV lorry who wants to go from Glasgow to Aberdeen driving through Perth and Kinross.
Not sure, not convinced about stopping, but and I don't know if David Littlejohn wants to come in with the Perth West stuff, but we're certainly from being the hub of Scotland with a huge amount of traffic that's passing through us, and it is why we, in our carbon footprint, we have a high transport element within there, because a huge amount of traffic's travelling through, and certainly within some of the strategies which, given the financial constraints, will be tough to achieve. And the Perth West is one where we have been looking at how we can try and decarbonise some of the transport with some of the projects out there. But and there are challenges achieving that. No question. Do you want to say a few words, David, or on that kind of?
Yes, I mean, we are a consequence of our geography, so there is a limit to what we can do at one level, but there is more that we can do to assist the national picture as well as the local. And I guess that's where Perth West potentially comes into play, where we can look at how particularly freight logistics works, and whether some of those very large articulated lorries that are kind of carrying goods further north and need to be the size they are, north of Perth, and part of that is about that kind of last mile logistics within Perth itself, but also transshipping onto smaller, cleaner, greener vehicles to take goods north beyond Perth. So we have a role to play in that because of our location, but you're absolutely right in the sense that we can't control all movement. That's just a consequence of our geography.
Thanks, Angus. Dave, your question.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, I think the question about the benchmarking was quite important by Councillor Kugali. I think there's a lot of good stuff in this report in terms of what we're aspiring to, and it's good to see. But I would like to see a bit more quantifying of just where we're coming from to see how successful we are being in going forward. It's not just the sort of bus vehicle miles, it's things like the number of heat networks, it's all these things. And I would welcome a part of this report the next time it comes forward, actually having benchmarks to show how we're performing, to see how we're changing, because that's the proof of the pudding. It's all very well saying we're going to cut the bus vehicle miles, we're going to cut the HGV vehicle miles, but we don't know what they are. We're never going to know if we're actually having the right effect or whether we need to try something different.
Yeah, but I'm not sure you had a question in there, but as a statement, you're absolutely right, and this is the first update, and as we keep getting more updates, we can maybe refine the information that's coming back to give a kind of KPI type, this more information on what we're achieving going forward. But this is the plan for the next year to see what we're achieving with that.
Yeah, my question was, can we in future reports see a sort of benchmarking set of statistics incorporated into the report?
I think basically, I think yes, I think absolutely yes on that, and I think it's a good suggestion, and we will do that. Thank you, Dave. Is that enough? Hugh, your second question.
Just a second question on, I said, with SSEN, I think you're saying quite often conversations with them, and problems in my ward. I know we've got so much ongoing with solar farms throughout the area, battery farms as well. The problem in the agricultural community is that some of them, large building sheds where they could put lots of solar panel and generate, but when they can get a connection from SSEN or be offered one, they're talking about in 2036 onwards. It's years ahead before it comes to that. And possibly the same problem will be with developing local situations as well. So we're to try and not cover the ground with solar panels, put them on the roof, which I know many people are considering doing. But if you can't get a connection, if you have a big enough roof, bigger supply, you can't get a connection for 12, 14, 15 years, which is pretty impossible.
Certainly where we can do private grid and use batteries locally and not connect to the grid, but you've certainly highlighted a key issue. I think that quite a lot of businesses and energy generation providers around the area are struggling with is the grid connections, where most of them are running into 2030, 2032, and that's definitely a challenge. I'm not sure, there's certain little bits in there we can do as highlight it, but I'm not sure what, apart from writing to get these grid connections in there, is out with our remit as a council. I'm not sure what more we can do. I don't know if there's any suggestion. Serge?
Thank you, Convener. Just to reiterate the relationship we have with SSEN, we recently met the SSEN engagement team, so the people who are dealing with the requests, and they have obviously changed the way they are approaching the engagement, and they are, much more engaging with, potential promoters there. So I think it's effectively having that positive engagement from the promoter side to it, and SSEN will be keen effectively to engage with them. However, it's true that the pipeline of project that SSEN has to deal with is very important in terms of volume, and there is an element about how they prioritize these requests from developers, promoters, and so on. But they have structured themselves to try to cope with that type of demand. So I think engaging with the engagement team at SAN will be beneficial, I think, across the board.
Thank you, Serge. Jack?
Thank you for the paper. It's obviously good to see progress being made. In Ward 2 Strathmore, I think there are around about a dozen applications at various stages of inquiry from developers in both solar PV and battery storage. A back of the cigarette packet calculation looked at around about I think at 1.600 megawatts. It certainly it's a substantial figure. I guess my question is, what are Perth and Kinross Council and your team working with the planning team doing to ensure as much of that benefit for these significant strategic assets, once they're constructed, if some of them are indeed constructed, actually stay as long-term benefits for both local residents and the wider benefit of Perth and Kinross? For example, are we looking to identify as part of applications that space is made available for local vehicle charging, where possibly reduced tariffs are available for local people, or to support our sort of wider aims and objectives around the strategic sort of road network? Are we able to sort of guide and support local businesses to get private wire connections, for example? It's just to understand, how you're engaging. So, for example, as part of that, it might be worthwhile if you could tell us, for example, how many of these applications you've dealt with, for example, or the council has dealt with, where you've made direct contact with developers, maybe not just through the planning process, but actually directly with them to understand potentially longer benefits. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you mean just the benefits from the actual projects going ahead, or do you mean like a community type benefit with these schemes, or a bit of both?
Well, it's the whole piece, convener. So for example, when a infrastructure piece of infrastructure, if it's been given planning permission, is going to be built, there will obviously be some construction work. But once it's built, potentially after that, there may or may not be community benefits. It's not clear within the solar PV farm scenario whether that's indeed mandatory or purely voluntary. But it's more to if we're effectively saying here in this paper that we're essentially decarbonising transport and heating and cooling through electricity. How do we get that effectively benefit to those local communities? If, for example, I lived in Cooper Angus, and there was significant solar farms built near or around my community, subject to appropriate approvals from the planning process, I would hope that I would get a direct benefit from that in terms of whether it was to get lower cost electricity to run my vehicle, or for example benefits around businesses that were in that area, etc. What are we doing to engage and look to see what these opportunities might be?
Do you want to do this, Serge? I don't know if David might want to come in as well. David?
And this is I mean, it's a really interesting question, and I think it's an important question, but it's actually it's a complicated answer. So I guess we engage with developers in two levels. One, we're doing it strategically in terms of the council's role as a player in economic development, and therefore there are discussions with developers about maximising the impact, the benefit of their projects. That does need to be, separate to discussions in relation to a planning application once it's been submitted, because we need to be careful that we need to legally we need to determine the application before us And therefore we shouldn't be at one level trying to change the application once it's been submitted. But that doesn't mean that the planners don't have conversations with the applicant to try and improve what is being proposed. Community benefits are not a statutory requirement. They're a voluntary agreement that developers often include as a way of potentially encouraging support for their application. Historically, that's been much easier with wind developments because there was a greater margin of profit, if you like, in there that they were able to allocate for these wide community benefits. Hence, you see the Perthshire Fund that SSE set up, where there have been significant amounts of cash distributed locally. Those margins are not as high in relation to other forms of renewable energy development, and what developers are telling us. And we do need to challenge when we get to the point of approving these applications, is that particularly with solar, the margins are not there to put in large amounts of community benefit. Now that, accepting that might or might not be the case is something we need to investigate. The council could, if it chose to, through its local development plan process, introduce policies that might require a greater degree of community benefit, but we need to go into that with our eyes open, because the net effect might mean no investment in this area and investment somewhere else. So it is a balance between trying to get and maximise and squeeze out as much community benefit as we can, without crossing a line that makes Perth and Kinross uninvestable. Now, a lot of this is new territory, and I think the conversations are we're at the right stage in the process in terms of LDP3 to have those conversations and get to a position of whether or not we do want to introduce some kind of policy that requires a community benefit, as opposed to at the moment negotiate it as a voluntary contribution.
Thank you. Thank you for that, David. Jack, you okay?
Yeah, and that's good to hear. I think in many ways, Perthshire and Strathmore in particular is a key target for
Jack,
developers.
Can we leave comments to the end and get on with the question?
Yeah, well, so effectively the question is, we still need to work out how we get more long-term benefits, and that may be, for example, a co-location of a refueling station for electric vehicles beside a solar farm, for example, as an easy, straightforward example, which can be potentially leveraged within the planning application. We could look, for example, at potentially encouraging developers that are looking to work cooperatively with local people with shared effectively ownership. There's a number of models there that we can be proactively promoting, and I think we need to do more in that area. And my question was really, what are we doing in that area around this piece?
Serge, do you want to come in a little bit?
As an example, I was on site 3 weeks ago talking with a developer, an onshore wind farm developer, to see how this development will effectively provide the economic and social benefits in the local area. And we talked about potentially community benefits, ownership, part ownership of, one or two of the windmill there. I think it's in the process when the project is being developed, because they're doing a lot of engagement with the community through public consultation. It's really established process in the industry to do that. So that's the right time, effectively, when they do all this public consultation, to bring forward some of these ideas. And it can come from the community, obviously. They can suggest, what you've just suggested there. And as a council, it's just to make sure that when they are, exposing or developing their ideas to the community, they are clear on what's possible and not possible. But they are the industry is quite it's like kind of peer kind of support and peer kind of education in the industry, where they're going through the same process of this public consultation, try to gather information and try to engage as much as they can before they put the planning application, because that's a key element about how they will effectively develop the planning. But that engagement, early engagement, is important, and we are doing that. We are meeting them on site to understand the relationship, and the relationship is not only with other we talked about EV infrastructure and possible, but it's also about other type of measures they can take in terms of forestation, for instance, peatland restoration, access to the land and so on. All of these aspects are discussed through pre-engagement with potential developers.
Thank you. Andrew.
Thank you very much again, convener. I'm at paragraph 616 on page 13. Can someone tell me a little bit about the Innovate UK Connecting Regional Travel project, which I haven't heard of, which worries me a bit? And what are the two new services being looked at in Aberfeldy? Thanks.
Davinder.
Okay. So the Connecting Regional Transport project has changed a little bit since it was put forward. What it is, it's looking at sort of a couple different issues. One is looking at access to healthcare. So during the phase 1 of the Innovate UK sort of investigations, there was a lot of community sort of conversations, and one of the things that came out repeatedly was access to healthcare. Sort of it was impossible, or it was very hard to access hospital appointments, GP appointments, all of those things by public transport. So as part of that, there's been more focused conversations around how we can unblock some of those barriers. Some of it's around awareness raising, around sort of existing services, around the sort of the taxi. Some of it's exploring about whether or not we'd be able to develop sort of better sort of car sharing or vehicle sharing for people who have appointments. There's discussions with the NHS about whether we'd be able to sort of group appointments for people from the same postcodes, just so everybody could potentially be seen on the same day, or have appointments after 11 o'clock, so they'd actually be able to catch a bus into Perth rather than needing to getting somebody to drive them. So that's one element of the project. The next element of the project was supposed to be around exploring the feasibility for an electric minibus, and that was working in partnership with the Tay Valley Time Bank. But since the project was put forward through another pot of funding, they did get their 8-seat minibus, which is due to be arriving soon if it hasn't already. And so with that, the project has morphed a little bit into doing sort of further engagement on sort of barriers and blockers around potentially using that, and also a wider sort of investigation into rural transport. So that's what the project is.
Thank you, Davinder and Andrew, for that question. David Illingworth, Councillor, you have 2 questions. Just go with both of them, David.
Okay. They're separate questions. The first question is around the new energy from waste site being developed in Bin Farms. Do we have any information about how that energy will be used?
Serge, are you able to answer that one?
Got some information, so thank you for your question, Councillor Illingworth. I think the promoter of the project, Public Energy with Bin Group, I think in terms of energy, they plan to use most of the energy on site. So it's effectively to use the energy either to power other operations, at Bean Eco Park, or new development there. I know they're also looking for exporting some of it, some of that energy. So in terms of energy, you go obviously the heat and power. So in terms of the power, that's potentially obviously trying to find users on site and off site. But obviously they are the same way as was discussed before, and they need connection to the grid, so they're working on that. In terms of heat, there's maybe much more potential on site, for instance, in terms of food production, because it's a very vast site, and there is a plan effectively to develop some food production there. In terms of the electricity, the power on site, there was also the possibility, coupled with the wind turbine, which are already there, to obviously store that energy through battery storage and potentially exploring the production of hydrogen there. So that's the kind of few elements that they're looking at.
David, your second question.
Second question is a more sort of generalized question. There's a lot of work gone into these reports and lots of initiatives been undertaken by the council. But a recent report from Internal Audit into Climate Change said that PKC has a limited impact. How optimistic are we that all the effort we're putting into all these projects are actually going to shift the dial on global climate change?
I think we've been here before, David, with this type of question with you. And we have to do what we can, whether that's personal, whether that's, as a council, whether that's encouraging businesses to decarbonise. I think we've got a paper coming up in a little bit that will show some of the stuff we have achieved and what we are doing. And we need to keep heading in that direction. We can just, we're responsible with what we are doing within Perth and Kinross, and we can have leverage in there. Your global part of it all, not going to, that's up for the planet and everyone else, but we all need to do our bit. And what we can in this chamber and within this council, we will continue to try and make strides within the challenge and budget situations that we have. I'm not sure there's any more to add, unless any officers want to come in. I'm not sure there's much more to add to that. Is there any further questions? I will move through the report. This report seeks your approval for the annual update on the delivery of the local heat and energy efficiency strategy and local area energy plan approved last year. Over the past year, we have made significant progress towards our LHEAth and LEAP, somebody help me, targets, aligning with national goals. We have established internal and external strategic work groups to ensure the delivery plan advances swiftly. We have also applied for funding opportunities for home energy efficiency measures, and some retrofit actions have already benefited the residents of Perth and Kinross. We recognise that the long-term impact will be felt by our residents, businesses and communities. It is essential for everyone, including the Council, to continue acting within their means to contribute to this effort. The priorities identified in the annual report for the next 12 to 18 months reflect our collective ambition. By adopting a whole energy system approach, we ensure these priorities support each other, add value, avoid duplication, and make the best use of our resources. I want to acknowledge the commitment and dedication of everyone who has contributed to our progress over the last year, and that's within officers, within the community, working with our residents, businesses, stakeholders, ensuring the successful delivery over the next 12 to 18 months. I am happy to accept the recommendation within the report and move the paper for approval. Can I ask Councillor Liz Barrett to second?
Happy to second the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Do any members have any comments on the report? David, did you have a comment?
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, I thought it was a good report, and officers are to be commended for the work they've put into it. I think there's a lot of interesting and exciting projects in it. My only comment is, as a dyslexic, I would ask if we can have a look at some of the acronyms and perhaps either use less or put a proper glossary in. I'll give you an example of a paragraph. It says, engage with Kinross Catch project, providing access to LHEES and LAEP evidence via SSEN, Lensa platform and tools. I mean, to me, that's just gibberish. It needs to be expanded out, or perhaps if the words that are there can link to an actual description of what they are, that would make it readable for me. Thank you.
I'm sure that will be taken on board. Thanks for the comments. Dave.
Thank you very much. I'm just hoping I can help Councillor Forbes with a couple of things relative to the questions he asked earlier through my work with TracTran. The impact of heavy goods vehicle traffic going through Perth and Kinross is, if you like, of concern in the TracTran area, that loading of through traffic. And the figure is not, I can't remember what the figure actually is, but it's not actually as great a percentage of our total as it might have been, but certainly in the business of looking at overall transport reductions, the burden for different authorities or through traffic is looked at or is known about. And the second point I'd make is that I can't remember where it's being done, but there is a study going on somewhere about the impact of delivery traffic by the likes of Amazon and others as to whether that delivery of internet shopping actually adds to the overall burden of transport, or whether by people not going to the shops it actually has an overall reduction effect. But there is work being done, and hopefully we might see some results out of that at some stage. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew. Angus, for your comment.
Thanks, and thanks to Councillor Parrott for explaining that, and hopefully that particular study that you referenced at the end of your comment there, Andrew, will come back to us one form or another. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things, Convener. I completely understand Councillor Illingworth's question, and I also completely understand your answer to it, that we all have a moral obligation to do everything that we can. And there's a huge amount of information in this report. There's lots of really interesting, exciting things, as already been said, but I still have this overwhelming feeling that the effort that we're putting into this, some of this completely out with our control, is possibly not going to deliver as much in return for us in the longer term. But I think I just want to say, finally, setting aside the acronyms, which we've already heard about, I think it's a really interesting, well written, and from my point of view, clear report.
Thank you. Grant Lane.
Thanks, Convener. I'd like to thank the officers for the report. It is interesting, and tend to look at it from a different perspective. The amount of, it's not a problem. It's a great opportunity for business and everything here in Perth and Kinross, and we want to be at the forefront of it. And that's why the officers are putting effort in to look at innovative ways of affecting, preventing climate change, etc. It's a massive industry across the world and across the UK, Scotland, and if we can't afford to be left behind when businesses want to come and invest here, as they look to reduce their carbon footprint. So we have to, the officers are doing this. This is a preparatory work, and hopefully very soon in the next 6 to 18 months, we'll see some investment and some outputs, as we've seen with the investment up at Bin Patrick, which was one of the first things that we attracted in, and our officers working with the private sector did a tremendous job to get that facility to come to Perth. So let's look at this in this chamber as an opportunity and a business opportunity for the whole of Perth and Kinross. Thanks.
Couldn't agree more, and a lot of the stuff coming out this will help address poverty as well. You know, and that's not trifle. It's a major issue. So there are added benefits beyond the decarbonising the heating network. Thank you very much for everybody's contribution. If there's no amendment, can I ask if we can agree the recommendations in the report?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Going to pass over to Councillor Liz Barrett for the next two items on today's agenda.
Thank you, Convener. Can I please ask Russell Stewart, who's a senior engineer in the flooding team, to introduce the report on the flood studies for Blairgowrie and Rattray Surface Water Management Plan and Alyth Natural Flood Management Study, which are pages 49 to 82 in your packs. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Hear me all right? Yep, good. So this report describes the Council's flood protection studies at two separate locations, Blairgowrie and Rattray and Alyth. These locations have experienced a history of flooding, most recently in 2023, and currently both communities remain at risk of flooding. The Council's duties with regards to flooding are set out in the Flood Risk Management Scotland Act. Cycle 2 Tay Local Flood Risk Management Plan was published in December 2022. This plan sets out the arrangements for various flood studies as a means of further improving our understanding of flood risk in certain locations. This plan identified a surface water management plan for Blairgowrie and Rattray and a natural flood management plan for a study for Alyth. The purpose of these studies was to investigate what further action would be required to manage flood risk in these locations. Actions could then be identified and assessed against technical, environmental, social, and economic factors to determine feasibility. Any feasible actions could then be implemented as part of a flood protection scheme. The report to committee today recommends that flood protection schemes are taken forward in Blairgowrie and Rattray and Alyth, as they are deemed to be economically viable using industry standard assessment criteria. The Blairgowrie and Rattray Surface Water Management Plan recommends a scheme consisting of a combination of 5 options to reduce surface water flood risk in each of 3 flooding hotspots. Those flooding hotspots are the town centre, Burnhead Road and Rattray Burn. The options are surface water diversion at Upper Allen Street in the form of a raised profile of the road, a speed hump. Option B is natural flood management on the Rattray Burn in the form of leaky dams. Part 3 is disconnection of surface water connections from the industrial area at Welton Road from the combined sewer. And this surface water will then be attenuated via sustainable urban drainage systems before being discharged to the River Erricht. The 4th part is construction of sustainable urban drainage systems on the Rattray Common to attenuate exceedance events on the Rattray Burn. And the 5th part is construction of a swale behind Burnhead Road to intercept and attenuate surface water runoff before being discharged to the Cuttle Burn. The total estimated capital cost of the scheme is 3.95 million with a cost benefit ratio of 2.3. This scheme will reduce the risk of flooding to 66 properties in a 1 in 30 year flood event and 77 properties in a 1 in 200 year flood event. The Alyth Natural Flood Management Study recommends a scheme comprising of the replacement and upsizing of the Johns Hill Burn culvert and improvement works on the Doctors Burn consisting of flood embankments and a new culvert. The total estimated capital cost of the Alyth NFM is 1.447 million with a cost benefit ratio of 1.79. The scheme will reduce the risk of flooding to 50 properties approximately 40 on the Doctors Burn, and 10 in relation to the upsizing at Johns Hill Burn Culvert. The Doctors Burn provides a standard protection of a 1 in 100 year, and the John Hill Burn Culvert is a 1 in 200 year, although there'll still be a residual risk of flooding from the Alyth Burn. Separate public engagement events in the form of community drop-in sessions were held over 2 days in the local facilities to disseminate the findings of both flood protection studies. And finally, the committee report notes that the proposed flood schemes will be submitted to SEPA for national prioritisation and inclusion in the next Tay Flood Risk Management Plan and Local Flood Risk Management Plan, which covers the period 2028 to 2034. The local flood risk management plan will set out the proposed implementation arrangements for both schemes, including timescales and how it will be funded. However, due to ongoing Scottish Government and COSLA review of capital funding for flood schemes and other schemes that the Council is already progressing, the timescales and funding arrangements for both schemes remain unclear for the time being. The next phase of work to develop the flood scheme proposals will therefore not commence until the funding review provides further clarity around capital grant funding and provision is made within the Council's capital programme. This concludes the introduction.
Go. Do members have any questions on the report? I see a question from Councillor Forbes. Thank you.
Thanks, Vice Convener. I'm praying that I'm misreading this report, but I'm on Appendix 2, and it's the capital cost for putting in what you described as a speed bump in Blairgowrie at £42,462. Please tell me I'm misreading this.
No, it's just a simple. It's basically a simple raising of the profile of the road to divert water into the adjacent culvert, which is the Cuttle Burn, which then runs out onto the River Aire. So it's a small element of the overall scheme.
But is a speed bump costing us £42,000?
There's design works related to that, as well as further improvement works down the watercourse where it already overflows out of the burn, so it's more erosion protection around that part as well.
So we're not spending 42 grand on a speed bump?
It's part of a package of work to achieve that, yeah.
Question from Councillor Grant Stewart.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Thinking about Alyth sitting down in a dell, was there much conversation when you had your public consultations from local landowners?
Hi councillors, I'm Gavin Bissett. I'm an engineer in the council's flooding team and carried out worked with the consultants on the Alyth NFM flood study. We engaged with landowners sort of early in the process as best we could. One estate, Banff Estate, are quite proactive in this area, so they've been looking at trying to gather funding to deliver NFM within their sites, and also as part of wider benefits that style of sort of work brings around carbon capture and biodiversity benefits and things. But unfortunately, they haven't been successful to date in achieving funding. We have engaged with landowners in the past in the upper catchment. It is a challenging thing to undertake and to sort of take through to a positive conclusion. The study as a whole looked at what NFM could be carried out, irrelevant of the landowner, just as a blanket. This is what we think we could do in the catchment. Unfortunately, I didn't find that it was economically viable or provided a significant level of benefit, regardless of that economic side. So ultimately, that didn't lead to any real further discussion with landowners. That being said, if landowners are willing to look at options and want to get
seek advice or discuss it with the council. We've advised the local community, obviously, that they should come to us, and we'll take those conversations forward.
Can I follow up, Vice Convener? In your presentation, you mentioned leaky dams, and I was just wondering that certainly in Cornwall, there's been success in upper catchment areas using beaver to retain and slowly release water. Was that any part of any conversations?
The presence of beavers within the Alyth catchment has been a sensitive topic in the past. There is a risk around blockages and debris carried by this particularly flashy and steep catchment in the burn once it enters Alyth. And there is presence of beavers in the Banff Estate owned areas. They're not a method that we would seek to sort of formalise, but the leaky dams that Russell talked about in the introduction are proposed in the Blairgowrie area on the Rattray burn. They have a limited benefit in certain catchments, and as I said, the Alyth burn's quite steep, so they typically can be overwhelmed and don't provide a huge amount of benefit as such. So you can naturally get them from beavers, but you can also engineer them, and we're looking to engineer them in other catchments, but unfortunately we aren't deemed suitable for Alyth.
Thank you, Gavin. I see a question from Councillor Jack Welsh, please.
Thank you, Vice Convener. So just I'm just trying to understand here. So this money has been spent on the flood alleviation, public money, I think 3.2 million, effectively to manage and mitigate potentially increased water coming into the area that potentially is captured, you know, through effectively the upper catchment areas, you know, that and you're saying that we've tried to engage with landowners that would potentially help maybe mitigate some of that, or indeed, you know, avoid the use of it, but we've had very poor, you know, in engagement. So does this mean that effectively public money is having to be spent because actions that could be taken, you know, are much less costly, are not being taken by those that effectively where this effectively floodwater comes from through increased, for example, climate change? Am I being too simple here?
In terms of the Blairgowrie and Rattray study, there is a limit to what any area of grassland or farmland can take in terms of accepting rainfall and filtering into the land. Once it exceeds that, it flows over land and towards the nearest watercourse, or if there's properties built at the back of farmland, it'll flow over land towards there. So it's not necessarily that some landowners aren't doing their bit to reduce surface water runoff. Sometimes it's just a natural overland flood route and it's causing particular issues with landowners. So the solution or the mitigation options we're looking at is to try and deal with that overland flood risk. For in Blairgowrie itself, there's obviously issues with the combined sewer flooding from that you're trying to improve through separation or whatever. So there is engagement. I think there was a previous committee where this was raised about that there's not a wholesale issue with landowners not doing their bit. It's we need to engage with them and they need to engage with us to try and come to a working partnership to try and resolve some of the issues. And that does require works that we're able to take forward.
Okay, that makes more sense. So I guess what you're saying, it's a multi approach. So it's both, you know, looking at measures, you know, within the local sort of communities, but also ensuring we've got that engagement. And I guess the quick follow-up question is, you know, are we engaging with, for example, farmers organisations and landowners organisations to look at effectively
trying to develop guidance policies that maybe changes how land use is carried out to potentially mitigate these things before they become an issue, with the amount of water that's coming down these rivers.
Yeah, I mean, in Rattery, we've spoken directly to a couple of landowners, myself directly with one in the roads department, liaised mainly because of surface water flooding onto roads. They've dealt directly with them. And we were drawing together a list of areas where we feel there is a bit of an issue from overland flow. And we're going to try and write to them and speak to them directly through, I think, the help with a councillor as well. It's going to put us in touch with them. So yeah, there are plans to do that if they haven't already happened.
Thank you, Councillor Welsh. Fraser Crofts would like to comment.
There we go. Finally work. It was just to say that with reference to the all-year weather report that this committee looked at a couple of months ago, that was an action that we've picked up on in terms of engagement with landowners, land agents, not just the farming community. I know that our colleague Rick Haynes, our flooding manager, he had a first meeting with Bailey McLaren on that particular issue. So it's just to say that we are looking at in the more sort of the widest context, if you like, not just specific to these two schemes.
Thank you, Fraser. And a question from Councillor Grant-Ling.
Thanks, Vice Convener. Yeah, I think the last meeting was about farming methods, where it was a flash floods and avoidable stuff. A lot of what's happening in Blairgowrie and Rattray and other areas, Dunkeld, whatever you do, the landowners do, are working with us, won't actually prevent what's happening, but it may mitigate in some other areas. The question to Russell really is, when people see that we've passed this paper today, can we actually dampen down their expectations of when this will, be looked at or move forward in reality? Because we're talking 28 to 34. We don't know if there's funding or anything like that. We've had this discussion about at Dunkeld and the Craigieburn one, where the council decided that they would provide the capital funding and move it on a lot quicker out with this. And I know that our capital budget and everything is extremely stretched at the moment, but you never know if we're going to put more money aside each year in the council tax, whether we could bring some of these projects forward. If it's left to outside agencies to come up with a solution, when would we expect or hope that the earliest it could be that there'll be anything done on the ground?
In terms of the funding arrangements, obviously at the moment we're unsure exactly. There's no feedback from the Scottish Government yet on that. In terms of these projects, yeah, the timescales would be from 2028 to 2034. So once funding was confirmed, we would then be able to start the project, which would be to engage a consultant to then take forward the feasibility design, which is what this is, into an outline design. You would then publish the scheme under the Flood Act. Once you've done that, you would then carry out the detailed design, which would include ground investigation as well. Then it'd be a procurement exercise before construction. So that process in itself takes about 5 years. So you're talking, if you start in 2028, it would be the latter end of the before you actually start work on site.
Thanks, because I've just seen the one coming forward, the Dunkeld, that is 5 years from when you actually have the funding in place and press the button. So it's just, at this point, hope you don't mind me making a comment that working together, but you've got to give credit to all the weather resilience groups that there are in Blairgowrie and in Cooper Angus and in Alyth that are doing sterling work just now, and we're working with them and giving them the tools to do the job. But if you're looking at that, what was it, 1 in 30 year and we're 10 years away from this possibly being done, that's like there's a 33% chance, 1/3 of a chance that these properties, 9 properties, will be flooded. Is that correct?
I mean, it could happen at any time throughout the year. So yeah, it's just a percentage of the risk of it happening. In terms of, yeah, it's 5 years away, so from 2020 onwards. So it's quite a while. But yeah, the resilience groups are doing a good job through Stuart Skeen and Frank Campbell. They're liaising with them, so we're happy to engage with any groups if they want to come and speak to us.
Thank you all. I don't see any more questions, so I'll move the report. As Russell has explained, the Flood Risk Management Scotland Act 2009 introduced a more sustainable and modern approach to flood risk management in Scotland. The flood risk management plans and local flood risk management plans set out a range of actions that SEPA and responsible authorities take to manage and, where possible, reduce the risk of flooding over a 6-year period. To better plan and coordinate action on this, the Council is working closely with other public bodies to implement national and local plans. These flood studies for Blairgowrie and Rattray and Alyth are some of the latest outputs from this ongoing process. They set out how flooding will be tackled in the future and how we will reduce the impact of our unpredictable weather to reduce the misery of flooding for more of our residents and businesses in the areas. Implementing flood schemes in Blairgowrie and Rattray and Alyth will significantly reduce flood risk to the local communities. However, as we've discussed, this will take time due to the current limitations on capital funding. The findings from these studies have been discussed with both communities at the local community drop-in sessions. The information was also made available on the Council's consultation hub, including the subsequent question and answer report addressing concerns raised during the consultation period. I'm happy to accept the recommendations within the report, and I move the paper for approval. I'd like to ask Councillor Waters to second.
Thank you. Happy to second this.
Thank you, Richard. Do members have any comments on the report? I see a comment from Councillor Illingworth.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Can I commend this report? It's extremely well written. It's very clear what the recommendations are. We get lots of bits of paper to read, often with very much time to read them and understand them. And it's a pleasure to get such a well-written report.
Thank you, Councillor Illingworth, and I would reiterate his thanks to the team for the work on this. A comment from Councillor Ling.
Thanks, Vice Convener. Yes, I know that the flood team are swamped with applications and people coming forward with projects, etc. And just because it is going to take a long time to do, it doesn't mean the preparatory work that has been done in these cases, which is quite intensive, isn't done. So they've got to be commended of starting in motion something that may take quite a long time. And so I thank them for their work, and I find them really receptive now when I try and get in touch with them. So I thank them for that as well. And I think they'll be very busy now, and hopefully this is the last time we hear Comrie flood scheme in this chamber, when Councillor Donaldson is here or not, is starting to move on. So that's just shows where you can get to at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ling. If there's no amendment, can I ask that we agree the recommendations in the report? Thank you. We now move on to the Public Bodies Climate Change Duties Compliance Reporting 2024 and carbon emissions. And I'd like to ask Davindi Grant, Team Leader in Climate Change and Sustainable Development Team, to introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Convener. This report provides an overview of the Council's annual public sector climate change reporting duty submission to meet our duties under the Climate Change Duties of Public Bodies reporting requirements of 2015, with the detailed report submission provided in Appendix A. It includes an update on the Council's operational carbon footprint and emission trends for the year 23-24 and the wider actions the Council is taking to address the climate emergency within our own operations. The report highlights a 31% reduction in year-on-year emissions, and it examines our performance across 3 main emission areas of waste, transport, and energy. The significant reduction is largely due to changes in waste processing, but there were improvements seen across the board, with smaller reductions from energy produced on site, business travel, and employee commuting. The report also includes reference to our emissions associated with purchased goods, works, and services, which is in addition to our reporting requirements and was a request from members last year, and that is presented in Appendix B. Members are asked to note the contents of the report along with the annual report to the Scottish Government in Appendix A. Thank you, Vice Convener.
Thank you, Davindi. Are there any questions on the report? If there are no questions, I'll move the report. This report provides an overview of the Council's climate performance within our own operations as required to meet our duties under Climate Change Duties of Public Bodies Reporting Requirements Scotland Order 2015. It seeks the Committee's approval for the Council's annual public sector climate change reporting duty submission. I was pleased to see our overall improvement across the 3 main emissions categories, with waste having the very significant 60% reduction in emissions due to the introduction of twin stream and the move away from landfill with the introduction of the grey bins, transport with a 10% reduction in council business emissions and employee commuting emissions, down a further 14%, and the slight reduction in emissions in energy, which has been helped by the rollout of our buildings management systems. We look forward to further reductions in future through implementation of Passau House standards in our new buildings like Riverside Primary and the replacement Perth High School and the new PH2O. The briefing note attached to the report also highlights our significant emissions associated with purchased goods, as Davindi mentioned, for purchased goods, works and services. There is currently no statutory requirement to report these, but the briefing note does reinforce the need to ensure that the climate implications are considered in every project and procurement decision that we make. And I'd encourage all members of this committee to undertake carbon literacy training to help us learn more about what PKC can achieve and encourage through our own actions the example we show and the influence that we have across Perth and Kinross. And I thank those who've already undertaken the training. I'm happy to accept the recommendations within the report and move the paper for approval. Can I ask Councillor Waters to second?
Thank you. Yeah, happy to second that, Liz. Thanks.
Thank you, Richard. Comments on the report. I see a comment from. Sorry, I'm not sure if I'm looking at comments on the previous report. No, I think, are there any comments in the report? There are no comments and no amendment. I ask if we can please agree the recommendations in the report. Thank you. I'll now pass back to Councillor Waters.
Thank you for that. Is everybody okay? Nobody needs a comfort break or anything? I thought we might have a look at one here, but everyone's okay. We will continue. Item 7 on today's agenda is the mobility strategy. Can I ask David Littlejohn, the Strategic Lead for Economy, Development and Planning, to introduce the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning. The mobility strategy is one of the 3 key place strategies that together enable the Council deliver its corporate plan objectives, the others being the local housing strategy and the local development plan. And importantly, the mobility strategy and action plan are also key enablers of the Council's climate change strategy, our regional economic strategy, and our regional transport strategy. Mobility strategy and action plan are the product of extensive consultation and engagement, leading to the consideration of draft documents by committee in May and final consultation over the summer. The consultation responses are summarised in Appendix 3. Turning to the strategy itself, which is attached as Appendix 1, the document clearly sets out the challenges and problems that the strategy is seeking to address around our geography and our socio-economic challenges, the climate emergency, high car dependency, public transport network, freight transport by road, and limited active travel opportunities. The document then focuses on 11 transport planning objectives, and then in section 4 articulates the methodology for selecting and appraising actions before concluding in section 5 with some narrative on delivery, monitoring and evaluation. The detailed action plan itself is attached as Appendix 2, and that focuses on 47 strategic actions, in addition to a number of supporting actions, which are also listed at the end of the document. Importantly, some of these strategic actions relate to behavioural change, without which the desired impacts will simply not be achieved. It's also important to note that the proposed actions will be delivered over 15 years, assuming in many cases the availability of funding and staff resource. The production of the Council's first ever mobility strategy and action plan has been a significant task and has been a real team effort, not just by officers within the Economy Development and Planning Division, but across the Council and beyond. I would, however, like to highlight the contribution to the work made by the principal authors, Elliot Williamson, who recently left the Council, and team leader Neil Moran, who is here with me today. And also online, one of Neil's colleagues, Carolyn Morley, who between them can help answer any questions or clarify any points. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Do we have any questions on the report? Dave, Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, Convener. Yes. The Kinrossshire Committee commissioned and produced an active travel plan for Kinrossshire. I was just wondering how that was going to be incorporated into what goes forward from this mobility strategy.
Thank you. Neil.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, the Kinross active travel master plan that was done, we will probably look to incorporate that into some of the wider active travel work that's been done both as the council and also with our partners through TACTRAN, and bring those pieces of work together into a more comprehensive active travel strategy and action plan that can maybe provide some focus to the teams that will be delivering that ultimately.
Noah Kugali, you have a question?
We've had a little bit of pre-warning about this one, and I said I'd ask about the 10% limit on bus vehicle usage, where we are in terms of that, and where that baseline was measured from. If we don't have any statistics, I'd like us to have them. It's I think, as was mentioned earlier, it'd be slightly concerning if we don't actually measure any of that and we're just putting out goals out there without measuring them.
Neil.
Yeah, thank you for the question. The 10% increase in the public transport network mileage came from the Transport Scotland's roadmap for the 20% reduction in vehicle kilometres. So it's part of a wider package of measures that will achieve that outcome. And I guess as we look to monitor and evaluate the strategy going forward, we will be looking at both outputs and process targets, things like that. But crucially, it'll be more about the actual outcomes and what that change in the public transport vehicle mileage results in terms of the mode share for active and sustainable transport. So yeah, I think it's something that will be monitored, but it's part of a wider monitoring and evaluation process.
Thank you for that answer. Is that okay, Noah?
It's kind of the answer that I expected. I am disappointed, obviously, that we don't know where we are right now. But yeah, there's nothing particularly due about that in this meeting right now. But want to consider going forward, I think.
Can I just ask a follow-on question to Noah's, like with the LHES, the local heat and energy efficiency strategy, where we're getting updates as that's going to progress through with the actions. Has any thought gone into this from the overall mobility strategy, whether there's every 2 years or something, there will be an update looking at the how we're delivering on the strategy, and for the next set of action points that will be attached to it. Thanks.
I mean, yes, there's something in the actual documents itself about the monitoring and evaluation framework, but you're absolutely right. Unless we monitor and report back, it's almost pointless. The council, as you know, has kind of invested quite heavily in its performance management system, and these actions effectively and others from the reports earlier will form part of PK Performs. And so it should be much more easy than it has been historically, both to kind of report on those actions and collate them in a way that is easy to understand and disseminate widely. So absolutely, yes, we need to, from the baseline, need to monitor and absolutely will be reporting back regularly.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Angus, good question.
David, just a wide and pretty general question. How dependent are we on outside funding for any of this to happen, and what's your gut feeling on timescales?
Well, when you look through the actions, many of them will be dependent on other partners to work with us on delivering, and that will require funding. The second part of your question about the gut feel about when and if that funding will be available, I think that's a much more difficult question to answer right now. We're in a clearly challenging time across the public sector in terms of availability of additional cash. But I think, following today, each of these actions needs to be kind of prioritised further, realistically, and the sources of funding identified and then chased. We've now got our external funding team in place, whose job it is to get out there and try and find those sources of funding, but it's not easy, and some of the actions will require significant amounts of funding. But I don't know if, Neil, you want to add to that.
Yeah, I think probably just reiterate that it is a challenging landscape, but I think crucially having an approved mobility strategy does allow us to focus on where we can deliver things with the biggest impact and demonstrate that. It really begins to allow us to focus on where we can make the best change.
Yeah, please do, Angus.
Thanks for that. I appreciate I was putting you in a difficult position with that pretty general question, but I ask it because I remember back probably 5 or 6 years ago when we were promised funding for the Dunkeld Road corridor project. It was kind of there, it wasn't there, it was there again. There was a press launch up at the library and everybody was shaking hands and having their pictures taken, and not much has happened. And whilst there's loads of really good stuff in there and I'm 100% behind it all, it just worries me that we're spending a lot of time and money putting together these plans when I think gut feeling in my gut certainly is that the funding is just not going to be there in any likelihood in the short term or even the medium term.
Thanks for the comment there. Councillor Dave, Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, there are some really good examples of mobility strategy action to encourage active travel. So, for example, we've given the mini buses to community groups. That's a really good thing. There's the Glenfarg community transport group, which is really massively increasing people using buses in that area. I was wondering, are there any other innovative things coming up? And are we planning to roll out the same type of thing with Glenfarg to other parts of Perth and Kinross?
Thank you. And Neil?
Yeah, I think the Glenfarg project's obviously, a bit of an exemplar in terms of how we can work with communities and really deliver change for public transport. And that's reflected within the action plan. There is an action in there that suggests that we will work with communities to look at improvements. I suppose fundamentally with the action plan, it's something that will be reviewed and updated, and if there are good examples that come forward either locally or from elsewhere, we can reflect that within the action plan and tailor a response as required.
Add to that, and it came up actually in a similar conversation at the Economy and Infrastructure Committee earlier in the week. There's a role in all of this for community action plans and local place plans, and the point I made at the beginning was that these strategies are all integrated. So whilst we're focusing on mobility today, there is an interplay with our local housing strategy, with our housing investment programme, with our anti-poverty work, with the local development plan. So as and when communities identify what their priorities are, we need to make sure that we're accommodating their aspirations appropriately in all of these place-based strategies. So absolutely, we do want to kind of build on good practice, and we want to hear more of innovation from communities that we can help respond to and support.
Thank you for that, Councillor Lane.
Thanks, convener. It's kind of following on from Councillor Forbes's comment about the work that we're doing now. So we have shovel-ready projects and we can bid in for the funding. Before, we were rather reactive, I felt, and I think we're a lot more proactive. And so it was just to ask you the question, will we continue to do these bodies of work? We're talking about funding coming and going. Well, we spent a lot of time doing 3 projects for levelling up funding and passed it through committee, and that money's disappeared. But I spoke to you, we're still working on these projects, or at least 2 of them, so that if there's another source of funding comes along, we can get them. So is that what we as a council and officers and that team are going to continue to do, so that we've got projects that the funding officer can then chase, rather than the funding officer chasing funding for a project we don't have in place?
Yes, and that's the purpose of kind of defining actions, honing actions, prioritising actions, and doing some feasibility around them, so that we're in a much better position and we're not on the back foot as and when is there a tendency of both governments to suddenly announce chunks of money and we're not ready and we don't have a prioritised set of actions. So absolutely, that work continues in the background to the point that funding, I'm hopeful that we will get through where we are now and funding will become available. And many of these projects are multi-year and will take some time to get in place. So doing the work now and being ready for that position in the future, I think is absolutely the right approach.
Okay, Grant, sorry.
Okay, thanks. So it's just to come back on, this is a really good piece of work and it covers a whole range of things. And because all that work's been done, and I know they're joined together, funding can come from one specific part of it that is covered and it can be taken forward. And I think, is that the reason of doing such a holistic piece of work, is that it covers all gamuts, because you never know which or where money is going to come from for a specific area, rather than doing one specific piece of work. And that's why we do these plans.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. We need that agility to be able to respond to opportunities as they come forward. And as David said, having the building blocks in place that allow us to much more rapidly develop projects and answer the strategic question about why we're doing X instead of Y is really fundamental as we go forward.
Thank you for that. Do we have any further questions on this report? If there's no further questions, I will move the report. Just like to echo David Littlejohn's word and thanks to Elliot Williamson, who done a lot of the work on this. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. But we do need to recognise the work and the engagement with the communities and elected members and across the field with this. But Neil and all the other members of the team that contributed to a big thanks. This is a hugely important document and exceptionally good and exceptionally important, as we've just discussed. This report presents members with an overview of the mobility strategy, its accompanying action plan and supporting documentation for the Perth and Kinross Council area. This strategy provides a pivotal step in shaping the future of transportation and mobility in our area and offers a comprehensive proposal to guide the management and development of our transport network over the next 15 years. It demonstrates our commitment to sustainability, facilities and supports the movement of goods and people across the area and aligns with national policies and strategies along with our own corporate plan priorities. The strategy responds to the diverse needs of our communities while following best practices in transportation and mobility planning. The actions within the strategy's action plan mark the beginning of a process, a journey towards a more connected and sustainable future. Crucially, this mobility strategy will serve as a catalyst for coordinated investment and resource allocation, supporting our efforts to secure external funding and engage proactively with stakeholders. It also addresses initial environmental and equality considerations head-on. If approved, the mobility strategy will be adopted by Perth and Kinross Council, thereby ensuring its consideration and delivery is prioritised amid existing pressures. I am happy to accept the recommendations with the report and move the paper for approval. Can I ask Councillor Liz Barrett to second?
Happy to second the report.
Do members have any comments on the report? Andrew?
Thank you very much. Digital connectivity will only ever go so far, I believe, and physical transport connectivity will always remain important. And I can only say that I'm delighted to see this council mobility strategy, the first of its type here, coming to fruition and, if you like, playing its role at our local authority level in the regional transport strategy that we've just produced through TACTRAN and which hopefully this mobility strategy will support through the regional transport strategy into our national transport strategy. I would like to add my thanks, if I may, to all of the officers who have contributed to what I see as a vitally important piece of work that gets our thought processes in line in this area and adds holistically to our local development plan and our housing strategy. The connectivity bit is no longer, if you like, left at the end and happens accidentally. It has been cogently thought through. And so thank you very much to all of those who have been involved in putting this together, and I hope that it remains a living document and is followed through in the years to come. And by way of finale, Elliot, as I understand it, has only gone as far as Stirling. He remains in the TACTRAN area, and about which that hopefully that's good. Thank you very much.
Thanks for these comments, Andrew. Angus, comment?
Yeah, thanks, convener. I think Councillor Laing's response to my point was actually very valid, and I have to confess, you can look at every everything from two opposite sides and come to a different conclusion. So it feels to me like we may get through a committee meeting without Councillor Ling and I having a spat over something. In fact, we may find some common agreement. But I think my point does still remain. We're putting an awful lot of effort into plans and strategies without any clear funding, and I'm really hopeful that the funding team and the funding officer will find funding to at least get some of those going forward. The minibus service in Glenfarg was mentioned. I think it's a fantastic thing that's happening there. In the Carsagowrie, we have our third meeting to try and form a similar group. That's next Thursday night. So hopefully that will prove some fruition. But I do also feel that my sense is that we're putting an awful lot of pressure on our communities to do things for themselves. I just get the sense that by asking our communities to do too much, we may be pushing just a little bit too far at what may become a closed door.
Thank you, Angus. Wish you every success. And I know officers are helping quite extensively with that. The community groups also with Glenfarg provide jobs for people as well. You know, because the bus drivers are paid to do the services. They help deal with a lot of inequality issues as well in transport and getting people into doctors and pharmacies and stuff like that, and measuring the benefit where communities do get involved is just huge. The numbers of people using the increases are just through the roof, and you know, the reasons for it are interesting. You know, but I think when communities do get involved, the results are often way better than what it does when we do things directly, or when businesses or that get involved. They seem to have a better success rate at hitting a lot of key objectives within it. So, but we'd love to see something similar out the cars. That would be absolutely brilliant. Any further comments on that? Thank you. If there's any amendments, if there's no amendment, can I ask that we can agree the recommendations of the report? That brings us to the end of business on the agenda. Can I thank everyone for attending and contributing this morning, and I can want to formally close, but then just say something very quickly afterwards. But if we can formally close the meeting,